Hi there, I'm John Lebensold for Killer PHP, and today what we're going to be doing is looking at how we can perform some more advanced operations with MySQL. So this is going to be probably a 10-part video where we're going to be starting with just looking at what joins are in a relational database. From there we're going to be looking at how we can create constraints to make sure that we have integrity in our data. Then we're going to look at what many people who design databases call one-to-many, and then many-to-many, and then creating views. We're going to look at timestamps. We're going to look at how we can do backups and restore data, and we're also going to take a little bit of a peek into the MySQL search engine. So to start off today, what I'm going to do is just look at joins with you. And before we even get there, I'm going to have to introduce some of the tools I'm going to be working with today. As you've probably noticed, I'm using a Mac. However, all this information and all these different tools have equivalencies on a PC, whether you're using Linux or you're using Windows. I have a very simple text editor here. It's called BBEdit. There's an equivalent free version called Text Wrangler, which you can download if you're on a Mac. I'm also using a MAMP stack, which is to say, essentially I have MySQL, Apache, and PHP running on top of Mac OS X. There are equivalent versions of this stack of open source free software. Usually if you look up XAMPP, X-A-M-P-P, you can probably get yourself set up on pretty much any platform. Again, this is free to download. And lastly, we're going to be doing a lot of work with the terminal. And we're going to be working on the command line because we're dealing with advanced topics. We're going to want to interface directly with MySQL. And using the terminal is, at the end of the day, the fastest and the simplest way of actually doing that. So on one hand, I'm going to be creating SQL scripts that we're going to work with back and forth so that we don't lose our place. And on the other hand, we're going to actually be interfacing with MySQL at a command line level. You'll also notice that I have phpMyAdmin open just to show you that, yes, we can actually double check things using phpMyAdmin. So with all of that, I say let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is just show you a bit of some of the tools we're going to be using on the command line. The first one is MySQL, and because I'm on a Mac and because I am working specifically with the MAMP version of MySQL, I am going to have to be a little more explicit with my connection to MySQL. Now, I already have the MAMP server running, which you can see right here. So I know it's running, but I want to actually use MySQL's command line tool to perform all the operations I need to perform. Just a note about SQL in general. Now, a while back, Stefan Mishuk put together an excellent beginner introduction to MySQL with the focus of being able to run SQL queries from PHP, mainly if you wanted to create records, update records, and delete records. The goal of this video is really to kind of broaden that knowledge and make you kind of more comfortable with how to do kind of complex queries with SQL, really use the relational aspects of a relational database like MySQL, where you're actually using different tables and you're relating data from one place to another. And lastly, if you do get into object relational mapping frameworks, ORMs as they're called, where you're not even dealing with SQL anymore, you've got some other package in PHP like Propel or Doctrine that's doing all that for you, that you can actually debug that code and understand a little bit of what is being generated for you on the fly. So you won't be totally at a loss. So in order to access my MySQL database, I'm going to have to actually use the client. And in this case, it's sitting in the MAMP folder under Library, under Bin for binary, and it's going to be MySQL. So if I just hit enter, then it's going to show me, it's going to log me in, and everything looks okay. However, something that I need to kind of check is if I go show databases, I'm going to notice that there's actually nothing there. Whereas if I go back to my PHP My Admin, you'll see that I have a whole bunch of different databases that I use for development purposes on my local machine. So in order to make sure that I'm properly accessing my database, I'm going to specify a username and a password. And in this case, it's going to be, we're going to use -u, which is the username flag, and then password is root. Now this is the default username and password for MAMP. And I'm just going to hit enter. So now if I say show databases, semicolon, and hit enter, I'm going to get all the databases that I'm getting here. So you can see the same thing in one place as well as the other. Now the first thing I want to do is actually create a database that we can work with. And then from there we'll be building up our examples together. So I'm going to create a database, KPHP, with a character set of UTF-8 and a collation of UTF-8 _ general _ CI. Now let me just explain that for a minute. Essentially, the create database is pretty obvious. We're creating a database. It's going to be called KPHP. The character set, being UTF-8, is just a default. In other words, we want to make sure that all the text that's being stored in our database is going to be encoded using the UTF-8 encoding structure, which means that if we have accents and we have Spanish characters or French characters, that they're going to be rendered properly. The other thing here is the UTF-8 _ general _ CI, and this is how the ordering of those characters in the character map. This is a pretty standard collation, so it's pretty much recommended. The CI at the end stands for case insensitive, and the UTF-8 is just because it's a UTF-8 collation. So I'm just going to finish that off with a semicolon. And now if I go show databases, you should see that there is now a KPHP database. So I'm just going to quit. And this time I'm going to log in and I'm going to specify my KPHP database at the command line by just adding KPHP at the end. Now if I go show tables, I should see nothing in there. But basically now I'm in the client and I'm also in that database. So now we're working within the KPHP database. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go back to my bare bones editor and create an empty SQL file for the purposes of this tutorial. And it's often helpful just to have an SQL file lying around that you can work with and work off of, especially if you're dealing with the command line, because the command line doesn't tend to remember things very well. So in the KPHP SQL folder that I've created on my desktop, I'm just going to create a SQL file called joins.sql. And we're going to do an introduction to joins. So before we go, too far along, I'm going to have to create some tables, obviously. The first table that I want to make is going to be a table for categories. So we're going to look at how we would want to structure a blog. Let's say we have a blog, and in the blog we have postings, like a particular piece of content, and then we have categories. So I want to be able to have categories for my various posts. Now this is called a one-to-many. There is one category and many posts, or many-to-one. You have many posts that are associated or related to one category. Now the advantage of using a join is that if you decide you want to change that category name, you don't need to go along and start updating all sorts of records for all the posts that have already been categorized. Let me try and illustrate this. So I'm going to start off by saying create table category. We need to start with something, right? So I'm going to create a table called category. And actually, let me just bump up my font size here so that it's nice and clear. And that's a little better. Okay. So here I'm going to say create table category. And it's going to have an ID, which is going to be an integer, and a primary key. and it will also auto increment. And what that means is that every time I do an insert statement, it's going to add a new record to my category table. And also I'm going to have a name. And the name will be a varchar. In other words, it's a field of variable length of 300. And the engine is InnoDB. And I'm going to explain that in just a minute. So let's just go through this together. So this is SQL, similar to what Steph was doing in that other video, except now we're actually describing how we want this table to look. And here we've got an ID, which is going to be our primary key. And just like in PHP, you can have strings, you can have objects, you can have integers, you can have arrays. Well, in this case, this ID is of type integer. And it's a primary key. And what that means is that MySQL is going to pay special attention to this key or this column in this database table, and we'll index it. And this will facilitate in searching and speed things up, and will also make sure that there's only one of every one of those rows, and each row can be accessed from its primary key. The auto increment is a handy little feature where when I do an insert, it automatically adds 1 to the existing ID. So the first thing I put in there is going to have an ID of 1. The second thing I put in there is going to have an ID of 2, and so on and so forth. The varchar is, again, it's a type, much like the integer, except it's for strings, short strings. And the maximum length of my strings, in this case, is going to be 300. The last little bit at the end is important for relational databases. So here what we're talking about is the engine, the actual structure of our table and how that's going to be stored and accessed within MySQL. Think of it as the difference. If you remember back in the day when there was FAT32 and NTFS, there was different file systems, and you had different ways of storing data on those file systems. This is a similar kind of structure where you can have multiple engines, and MySQL is driving those different engines. The InnoDB engine is the most current and the one that's suggested, at least at this stage in the game, and it's great for doing exactly what we want to do today, which is relationships between tables. So I'm just going to select these two lines and hit copy, and I'm going to paste them in here, and I shouldn't get any errors, which I don't, which is good. And if I say show tables again, I should see that we've got a category table. And if I say describe category, I should see that I've got my ID, and I've got my name, and I've got a primary key with auto increment. And if I do an insert into category, name, values, politics, and then I do another one, let's say international, and then I do a select star from category, then I'm going to have an ID of 1 and an ID of 2, and politics and international. So far so good. So now that we've done this much, we're going to make another table, and this table is going to be for postings, and I'm also going to set up some dummy data here. So we have the category for politics, and we also want a category for international. Let's say we want one for technology, and another one for entertainment, and another one for sports. This is a very generic blog. We're doing anything and everything. And lastly, we're going to have an other category. Now, I'm also going to create a new table, and this table is going to be called post. And it's also going to have an ID. And instead of there being a name with a varchar of 300 characters, there's going to be a title of varchar 300. But there's also going to be a content column, which will be of type text, which means that it can be any length. If you're coming from an Oracle world, this is the equivalent of a CLOB, a large character blob. Basically a place where you can put as much content as you want, as much text content as you want. And then I'm going to have a category ID also of type int. And we'll talk about that in just a second, because that's how we're going to build our relationships. So in order for this to be nice and easy to work with, I'm going to create some drop statements. And a drop statement basically deletes or gets rid of a table. So I'm going to say drop table post category and drop table post. So if I take my drop table category and paste it in, it will, if I go show tables, I won't see anything anymore. Now I'm going to take all of this, all these SQL statements, and I'm just going to paste them in one by one. And if I say show tables, I should have category and post. And if I do a select star from category, I'm going to have my 6 categories, and everything looks pretty peachy. And if I describe my post, it looks also pretty good. So there we have it. Now let's start adding some content to our posts and do some very simple joins. So the first thing I'm going to do is an insert into post. This time we are going to specify that we want the title and a category ID. And the values are going to be, I don't know, let's say there's a political posting, and it will have a category ID of 1, right? Because we know that politics is 1 up here. And I'm just going to create a couple more of these. And then I'm going to create another one, and this is going to be more politics. So it's also going to have a category of 1, and you're going to see what I mean when I say one to many. And then there's going to be some kind of international news, which will of course be category 2. And then we're going to have something related to technology, new iPhone apps. Could you need any more iPhone apps? I don't think so. But anyways. Then we also want to have something about entertainment. I don't know, Academy Award winning movies. Let's try that. 4. And let's just put something in about sports. Olympics 2010. And that should be good. We won't put anything in the other category. So at the top I did a drop table. Now if I do drop table category, it'll say fine. But then if I run it again, then it's going to say error, 1051 unknown table category. So in order to get around this, in order to be able to easily paste in our SQL script as we're building it, I'm going to add if exists to this wonderful call. So it'll say drop table if exists category and drop table if exists post. So now when I select all this and paste it into the MySQL command line, and I do a select star on post, I'm going to have the various posts. Notice that the content right now is null, and it's going to stay null until we start looking at the MySQL search engine at the end of this series. But you could basically put anything you want in there. So we have the title, we have the content, we have the category ID, and then we have select star from category. And we have our 6 categories. Now let's start looking at how we can join the 2 pieces of data together. And this is where the one-to-many thing becomes a little more interesting. So let's say I wanted to get all of the politics postings, right? Then I could do something like I could do a select star from, let's see how we could do this. Actually, let's just start with just a simple join. So if I wanted to just join the posts to the categories, then it would be as simple as saying select star from post, P, left join, category, C, on p.categoryID equals c.id. Now let me just explain this for a second. So the select star from post p, I think you've seen this before. Basically what we're doing is we're just saying select every column from the table post. Now this little p here means that I want to actually start referring to the post table as just p. It's an alias, it's a shortcut. So that's select star from post p. The left join is what we're going to be doing, where we're basically just taking one table and then gluing it to another table. And we're going to be left joining with the category table, and it's going to have a shortcut of C, and we're going to glue the two together using p.categoryID, which is the post category ID, when the post category ID is equal to the category ID. So it's very important that the two line up. So if I hit enter, then I'm going to get essentially the join that I was talking about, where we have the political postings and their category name. And we have international news, and it's got the international category. And we've got the new iPhone apps, and they're in the technology section. And the Academy Award-winning movies, and so on and so forth. So that's just a quick introduction into left joins. We're going to be looking at how they compare to outer joins, or what's called a right join. A left join is also called an inner join in the next video. And then we're going to start looking at constraints. I'm John Lebensold, and thanks for listening.